The blood pooling beneath Colonel Jack Reeves carried the same copper scent his father had described from Quezon decades before Jack was born. Strange how some things transcended generations even when everything else had become unrecognizable. He stood in the center of an amphitheater, carved from crystal and light, surrounded by beings whose silver blue skin shimmered like liquid mercury under the harsh illumination of three artificial suns. Thousands of eyes regarded him with contempt, with curiosity, with something that might have been fear if these creatures admitted to such emotions. His ribs screamed with every breath. His left eye had swollen shut from the blow he had taken during the arrest. None of it mattered. Jack Reeves had faced death before, had shaken its hand, and walked away. This was just another mission. Lord Kalen rose from his elevated throne, forearms spreading wide in a gesture that commanded silence throughout the vast chamber. His voice echoed like thunder through mountain valleys, resonant with authority and barely concealed triumph. The human creature before us has committed the highest offense against Valerian sovereignty. He has contaminated our beloved queen with his primitive biology. He has defiled a sacred bond meant only for those of noble blood. The punishment as decreed by laws older than your primitive species has existed is death. Jack wiped the blood from his lip with the back of his hand, leaving a crimson streak across weathered knuckles that had seen too many fights to count. The gesture drew gasps from the assembled nobility, as though such casual defiance toward their proceedings constituted yet another crime. He supposed it did in their eyes. Everything about his existence seemed to offend them. I survived 3 tours in Afghanistan when my convoy got hit by IEDs more times than I can count. I survived watching my son die through a communication screen while I floated helpless in orbit 3 years ago. I survived pirates who left me for dead 72 hours ago. Jack's voice carried across the crystalline chamber without amplification, rough as Texas gravel and just as unpolished. You think your fancy execution is going to scare me? I buried my wife to cancer and my son to space. Death stopped being a threat a long time ago. Now it is just an old friend I keep disappointing. Movement at the edge of his vision. Seraphina rising from her throne, 4 elegant arms trembling, with an emotion he had learned to recognize through their bond. Not fear, something far more dangerous. The glowing patterns along her neck and shoulders blazed with intensity he had never witnessed before, turning her alien features into something terrible and beautiful, and absolutely lethal. Anyone who touches him dies by my hand. Her voice rang through the chamber like crystal shattering against stone, and for one breathless moment the entire assembly froze. This man belongs to me. My bond, my choice, my consequence to bear. If the council wishes to challenge my authority, let them step forward now and face what their ancestors feared for 10,000 years. Silence. Absolute and complete. Jack almost smiled. Almost. 72 hours earlier, he had been dying alone in the cold void between stars, convinced that the universe had finally run out of reasons to keep him breathing. The attack came without warning, as most fatal things did. One moment, the exploration vessel Prometheus was cruising through uncharted space on humanity's first deep-range mission, and the next moment, the hull was screaming as plasma fire tore through reinforced titanium like paper through flame. Colonel Jack Reeves had exactly 4 seconds to process the tactical situation before training took over and thought became unnecessary. Zephyrian raiders, at least 12 attack craft, coordinated assault patterns suggesting military discipline rather than opportunistic piracy. They had been hunted, which meant someone had known their trajectory. The bridge erupted into chaos. Commander Stevens died first, his station exploding inward with enough force to paint the ceiling with what remained of his career. Lieutenant Park and Specialist Okonkwo followed within seconds, caught in the secondary detonation that ripped through the navigation console. Jack grabbed Lieutenant Maya Chen by her flight suit and hauled her toward the emergency corridor as the primary hull breach alarm began its futile screaming. "Move, soldier. That is an order." His voice cut through her shock with the precision of decades commanding men and women through impossible situations. She was 28 years old, brilliant as hell, and currently frozen with the kind of terror that killed people faster than enemy fire. Her father had been like that once, back in the early days before combat had burned the hesitation out of him. Jack had been there when Captain David Chen learned to fight through fear during their first deployment together. He had also been there 15 years later when David died, saving a transport full of civilians from a reactor breach. Promise me you will look after her, Jack. She is all I have left. The memory struck like shrapnel, unwanted and unavoidable. Jack shoved it aside, along with the grief that never quite faded, and focused on keeping David's daughter alive. They reached the escape pod bay as another explosion rocked the dying ship. Maya's arm hung at an angle that suggested at least one compound fracture. Blood streamed from a gash across her forehead, painting half her face in crimson. She was conscious barely, and that would have to be enough. The pod ejected into the void just as the Prometheus began her final death spiral. Through the tiny observation port, Jack watched the ship that had carried them across impossible distances become a brief flower of light and debris. 3 years of preparation. Humanity's boldest step into the unknown. Gone in less than 4 minutes. Maya slumped against the pod's interior, her breathing shallow and irregular. The medical scanner confirmed what Jack already suspected. Internal bleeding, fractured ribs, severe concussion, and the beginning stages of shock. The pod's emergency kit contained enough supplies to keep her stable for maybe 6 hours. After that, mathematics would do what pirates had failed to accomplish. Jack settled into the pilot's seat and began scanning for any signal, any beacon, any indication that the universe had not completely abandoned them. The void answered with static and silence. He was 58 years old, bleeding from wounds he had not yet cataloged, and completely responsible for the life of the only other survivor. The odds were not favorable. They never had been. His father had told him stories about Quezon, about being surrounded for 77 days by forces that wanted nothing more than to wipe them off the map. The old man had survived that siege and come home to raise a son who would follow him into uniform. Jack had learned everything he knew about survival from those stories from a man who understood that giving up was never an option, no matter how bad things got. The tractor beam caught them 11 hours later when Jack had already begun composing messages he would never be able to send. One to his sister in Austin, apologizing for missing another Christmas. One to David Chen's widow, explaining that he had failed to keep his promise. One to Sarah's grave, telling his late wife that he would be joining her soon. The station that swallowed their pod defied every expectation built from decades of science fiction consumption. No cold metal corridors or harsh industrial lighting. Instead, they passed through an architecture that seemed grown rather than built, organic curves and bioluminescent surfaces, creating spaces that felt more like the interior of some vast living creature than any structure human hands had conceived. Jack cataloged details, automatically defensive positions, sight lines, potential escape routes. The information was useless given his current condition, but old habits died harder than old soldiers. They separated him from Maya Boys almost immediately. 4 guards with weapons he could not identify escorted him to a medical facility while Maya was taken in a different direction. Jack fought the instinct to resist recognizing the futility of combat against beings who stood 7 feet tall and possessed 4 arms each. The logical part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through situations that should have killed him 100 times over, counseled patience. Observe, adapt, survive. The medical facility resembled an art gallery more than any hospital Jack had encountered. Curved walls displayed what might have been paintings or might have been windows into other dimensions. The examination table was warm beneath him, conforming to his body with unsettling precision. Medical instruments floated in the air, held aloft by technology so advanced it might as well have been magic. And then she entered, and for a moment Jack forgot about pain, forgot about Maya, forgot about everything except the creature walking toward him. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her skin shifting between silver and blue, like moonlight dancing on water. 4 arms moved with a grace that made human movement seem crude by comparison, and her eyes, those vast pearlescent orbs, held an intelligence that made Jack feel simultaneously insignificant and utterly seen. Intricate patterns glowed softly along her neck and shoulders, pulsing with a rhythm that might have been heartbeat or might have been something entirely different. Human. Her voice reminded him of wind chimes in a summer breeze, melodic and strange and somehow exactly right. You are severely damaged. Jack forced himself to focus despite the blood loss that was making the room spin in lazy circles. He had endured interrogation resistance training, had maintained coherent thought through pain that would have broken lesser men. This was nothing. You should see the other guys. Actually, you probably should not. There is not much left to see. Something flickered across her alien features. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. Your species has an unusual response to trauma. You create humor where others would despair. It is either laugh or cry, and crying interferes with my tactical assessment. Jack tried to sit up and immediately regretted the decision as his broken ribs lodged their formal protest. The galaxy shifted sideways, and for a moment he tasted copper and darkness. Four hands caught him with surprising gentleness, lowering him back to the table. Do not move. I am Sarah, medical officer of this station. Your companion is being treated in another facility. She will survive, but you... Her shimmering gaze studied him with an intensity that felt like physical pressure. Your injuries are extensive: internal bleeding, fractured skeletal structure, cellular damage from radiation exposure. Standard treatments will not be sufficient. Standard treatments. Jack almost laughed at the absurdity of applying that word to anything happening in this room. So what are the non-standard options? Sarah hesitated, and in that hesitation, Jack recognized something he had not expected: uncertainty. There is a procedure, ancient, rarely used. It would heal you completely, repair damage that would otherwise be fatal. I am hearing a but in there somewhere. The procedure creates a biological bond between healer and patient. Permanent synchronization of life force. Neither party can survive extended separation from the other afterward. The words hung in the recycled air between them, heavy with implications Jack's blood-starved brain struggled to process. You are telling me that if you save my life, we are stuck together forever, yes. And you are still offering, yes. He studied her face, searching for deception or hidden agenda or any of the thousand warning signs his decades of experience had taught him to recognize. He found none. Only a strange earnestness that seemed entirely out of place in a being who could presumably command others to perform this procedure in her stead. Why, you do not know me. I am nothing to you. Why would you chain yourself to a dying stranger? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Her four hands continued working, applying some kind of glowing substance to his wounds that dulled the pain to a manageable roar. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its clinical detachment. I have lived for 200 of your years. In all that time, I have never encountered a being who faced death with such... She paused, searching for the word. Defiance. You are broken and bleeding and surrounded by strangers who could end your existence without consequence. And you make jokes. You ask questions. You study this room as though planning how to escape from it. Jack managed a weak smile. Old habits. Your companion called out for you during her initial treatment. Lieutenant Maya Chen. She said that you saved her life, that you protected her when the attack came, that you promised her father you would bring her home. The mention of David hit harder than any of his physical wounds. How do you know about her father? She was delirious. She spoke of many things, but it was enough to tell me that you are not the primitive creature the others believe you to be. Sarah's luminous orbs met his directly. You have honor. You have courage. You have something worth preserving. Silence stretched between them, filled with the soft hum of alien machinery and the steady rhythm of Jack's labored breathing. He thought about Maya unconscious in some other part of this station, depending on him to find a way out of this impossible situation. He thought about David Chen, dead for 15 years, but never quite gone. He thought about his son Daniel, whose last words had been an apology for not being able to make it home for Christmas. He thought about Sarah, who had fought cancer for 3 years before it finally took her, leaving him to face the world alone. She had made him promise to keep living, to find reasons to wake up each morning. He had kept that promise through sheer stubbornness, but the reasons had grown harder to find with each passing year. Do it! His voice emerged steadier than he expected. Whatever it takes. I made a promise to bring Maya home, and I do not break promises. Sarah's four hands paused in their work. You understand what you are accepting, Shady. I was married for 32 years before cancer took my wife. I know what it means to be bound to someone. At least this time I will not have to watch you die slowly. Something that might have been sorrow flickered broad across her alien features. Your species carries such weight. We carry what we must. Now, are we doing this or not? The procedure began without further discussion. Sarah placed all four hands against his chest, her glowing patterns blazing with sudden intensity. Jack felt warmth spreading through his broken body, not the heat of fever, but something deeper, something that reached into places medicine had never touched. The pain that had been his constant companion since the attack began to fade, replaced by a sensation he could only describe as connection. And then the vision started. He saw through Sarah's eyes, experienced memories that were not his own. A child with silver blue skin sitting alone on a throne, too large for her small frame, watching as guards carried away bodies wrapped in ceremonial cloth. Blood on the floor of a great hall, crimson against crystal, while a voice announced that the king and queen had been assassinated and that the young princess must now assume the burden of rule. Decades of isolation, of duty, of loneliness, so profound it had become background noise rather than acute suffering. In return, she saw his memories. The desert heat of Afghanistan, 23 years old, and certain he would never see Texas again. The wedding in Austin, Sarah laughing as she tried to stuff cake into his mouth. Daniel's first steps, first words, first flight. Sarah's diagnosis, the treatments that stole her hair and her strength, but never her smile. The hospital room where she had squeezed his hand one final time and whispered that she would wait for him. The communication screen showing Daniel's face as the rescue shuttle's reactor breached his son, saying, "I love you, Dad," before the signal dissolved into static and silence. The connection snapped into place with almost physical force, leaving both of them gasping. Jack lay on the table, his wounds healed, but his soul feeling more exposed than any injury had ever made him feel. Sarah stood beside him, her pearlescent eyes wide with something that might have been wonder or might have been horror. "You carry so much grief." Her voice emerged as barely a whisper, "so much love that turned to loss. And still you continue." Jack sat up slowly, testing his newly repaired body. The movement came easier than it should have, strength returning to muscles that had been failing minutes before. "What else is there to do? The people I loved would want me to keep going. So I keep going." Before she could answer, the door burst open with explosive force. 12 guards in ceremonial armor flooded into the medical facility, their weapons trained on Jack, with the kind of precision that suggested they had been waiting for exactly this moment. An officer older than the others, with a battle-marked visage that spoke of centuries of combat, dropped to one knee before Sarah. "Your Majesty, we detected the activation of the light bond. The Council demands an immediate explanation." Jack watched the color drain from Sarah's glowing patterns, watched her four hands clench into fists at her sides. "Your Majesty?" The title echoed through his newly enhanced awareness, carrying implications that reshuffled everything he thought he understood about his situation. "There has been no crime committed here, General Theron." Sarah's voice had transformed, the warmth he had heard minutes before replaced by cold authority. "I exercise my sovereign right to heal a patient using methods of my choosing." General Theron rose, his weathered features a mask of barely contained emotion. "With respect, Your Majesty, the light bond is not a method of healing. It is a sacred rite, a marriage covenant, and you have bound yourself to—" His eyes swept over Jack with undisguised contempt. "This creature." The word creature hit Jack like a slap, but he kept his expression neutral. Decades of military service had taught him when to fight and when to gather information. This was definitely an information-gathering moment. "The prisoner is under my protection." Sarah stepped between the guards and Jack, her forearms spreading in what Jack recognized as a defensive posture. "He will not be harmed. The Council will have something to say about that, Your Majesty. The Council answers to me, not the reverse." The standoff lasted perhaps 10 seconds, though it felt considerably longer. Finally, General Theron inclined his head in a gesture that acknowledged authority without conceding agreement. "As you command, Your Majesty. But I must inform you that Lord Kalen has already summoned an emergency session. The entire nobility has been called to witness." Witness what Jack found, his voice tired of being discussed as though he were furniture. "I did not ask for any of this. She saved my life. That is all that happened." General Theron turned to him with an expression that suggested he was regarding something unpleasant stuck to his boot. "You bonded with Seraphina, Supreme Sovereign of the Valerian Empire, ruler of 47 worlds, commander of the Eternal Fleet. Whatever you intended, primitive, you are now bound to the most powerful being in this sector of the galaxy." The words took a moment to process. Jack looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and suddenly all the small details he had dismissed as cultural differences resolved into a clearer picture. The deference of the guards, the quality of her medical attire too fine for any ordinary physician, the authority in her voice when she gave commands. You are the queen. His tone carried more resignation than surprise. Of course you are, because my life was not complicated enough already. I am sorry. Sarah's formality cracked for just a moment, revealing the uncertain creature he had glimpsed through their bond. I should have told you before the procedure. I needed someone to see me as something other than a crown. Just once. Well, congratulations. Jack rubbed his face with both hands, feeling the weight of the situation settling onto shoulders that had already carried too much for too long. You found the one human in the galaxy who does not care about your title. Unfortunately, it seems like everyone else cares a great deal. The emergency council session convened within the hour. Jack stood in the center of that crystalline amphitheater, surrounded by beings who viewed him as something between a curiosity and an abomination. The charges were read with ceremonial gravity: corruption of sacred rites, contamination of royal lineage, violation of interspecies protocols dating back thousands of years. Through it all, Jack remained silent, watching and analyzing, and waiting for the moment when information would become useful. Lord Kalen presided from an elevated throne that placed him slightly higher than Sarah's own seat. The resemblance between them was subtle but present, same bone structure, beneath different expressions, same glowing patterns, though Kalen's burned with colors that seemed colder, harsher. His forearms moved with calculated precision as he outlined the legal situation. The ancient laws are clear, Your Majesty. A ruler who bonds with a being of inferior status forfeits claim to the throne within 30 days, unless the bondmate proves worthy through the 3 royal trials. Kalen's voice dripped with false sympathy. These trials were designed for nobility of other worlds, not. His gaze swept over Jack with theatrical disdain. Whatever this creature is. I am aware of the laws, Uncle. Sarah's response carried ice. I am also aware that the light bond cannot be dissolved once formed. What exactly are you proposing? The trials must proceed, of course. Kalen spread his forearms in a gesture of helpless bureaucracy. Tradition demands it. Should the human fail, as he inevitably will, both parties will face the consequences prescribed by law. Death. Sarah spoke the word flatly. You are sentencing us both to death. I am sentencing no one, dear niece. The law sentences, I merely interpret. Jack had encountered men like Kalen before, creatures who wrapped their ambitions in the language of duty and principle. They existed in every military hierarchy, every government, every organization where power was something to be accumulated rather than exercised. They were dangerous not because of their strength, but because of their patience, their willingness to wait decades for the right moment to strike. Kalen had been waiting for this moment. Jack felt the certainty settle into his bones. Whatever had brought him to the station, whatever cosmic accident had resulted in his bond with Sarah Kalen, intended to use it as the weapon he had been sharpening for a very long time. When do these trials begin? Jack's voice cut through the murmuring assembly. If I am going to die, I would like to know the schedule. Kalen regarded him with something approaching interest. The human speaks. How novel. The first trial begins tomorrow at dawn primitive. You will be tested in wisdom, in strength, and in loyalty. Fail any single trial and you will be executed. Pass all 3. His smile contained no warmth whatsoever. But you will not pass. Your species lacks the capacity. My species put men on the moon with less computing power than a modern calculator. Jack held Kalen's gaze without flinching. We invented democracy, eradicated smallpox, and split the atom all within the same century. Do not tell me what we lack the capacity for. The assembly stirred at his defiance. General Theron, standing among the military officials, showed the faintest flicker of what might have been approval before his expression returned to stone. Kalen simply laughed. Spirit, how entertaining. Enjoy your final day, human. Tomorrow you begin discovering just how little your species actually matters. The session ended with Jack being escorted to quarters that were technically a prison cell, but resembled a luxury hotel suite more than any confinement he had ever experienced. Maya was waiting for him there, her injuries healed by Valerian technology, her expression caught somewhere between relief and confusion. Colonel. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and embraced him with a force that suggested she had been uncertain whether she would ever see him again. They told me you were in a council session. They told me you bonded with their queen. Apparently I did. Jack returned the embrace, feeling the tension in her shoulders, the fear she was trying to hide. How much did they tell you enough? Maya pulled back, studying his face with the same analytical intensity her father had possessed. They are going to kill you if you fail these trials. They are going to kill both of you. That seems to be the general plan. Yes. Then we need to escape. Find a way back to Earth. There has to be something we can do. Jack guided her to a seat near the window, if the transparent section of wall could be called a window. Beyond it, the station sprawled in impossible directions, architecture that defied human understanding of physics and space. Somewhere out there, 47 worlds acknowledged Sarah as their sovereign. Somewhere out there, forces were moving in patterns Jack was only beginning to perceive. There is no escape, Maya. Not from this. The bond is real. I can feel her right now, sense her emotions like they are my own. If I run, we both die, just slower. Then what do? We do what soldiers have always done when the odds turn against them. Jack's voice carried the weight of decades of lessons learned in blood and fire and loss. We adapt. We improvise. We find advantages our enemies do not expect. And we never give up until the mission is complete. What is the mission? Survive. Protect you. And figure out what Kalen is really after, because I have seen that kind of ambition before. He is not doing this for tradition or law. He is doing it because he wants something, and we are standing in his way. The door opened without warning, admitting Sarah in robes far more elaborate than the medical attire she had worn during their first meeting. Her glowing patterns pulsed with agitation, and through their bond, Jack felt her emotional state as clearly as he felt his own fear, anger, determination, and beneath it all, a desperate hope that she was trying very hard to suppress. I needed to see you. Her eyes flickered to Maya, acknowledging her presence with a brief nod. Both of you, there are things you must understand before tomorrow. Pull up a chair, Your Majesty. Jack gestured to the room's minimal furnishing. Apparently, we have much to discuss. Sarah remained standing, her forearms clasped in what Jack was learning to recognize as a gesture of deep unease. The trials are not merely tests. They are rituals designed to break those who attempt them. In 3,000 years, only 4 outsiders have passed all 3. The rest died in the attempt. Encouraging. What do I need to know? The first trial tests wisdom, but not the wisdom of knowledge. You will be given a puzzle that cannot be solved through study or preparation. It requires understanding of Valerian thought patterns, of cultural assumptions embedded so deeply that even we forget they exist. And you are going to help me understand those assumptions. Sarah hesitated. Through the bond, Jack felt her internal conflict, duty warring with desire, tradition battling against something newer and more fragile. Yes, what I am doing could be considered treason. If discovered, I would face severe consequences. Why risk it? Maya's question cut through the diplomatic silence. You barely know him. Why would you risk everything for someone you met hours ago? Because I saw his memories during the bond. Sarah's voice dropped, becoming something softer and more vulnerable. I saw what he carries, the wars he survived, the family he lost, the wife who made him promise to keep living, the son whose last words were an apology, the promises he keeps even when keeping them costs him everything. She looked at Jack with those vast, shimmering eyes, and for a moment the queen disappeared, leaving only the lonely creature who had lived for 2 centuries without ever truly being seen. He is worth saving, and I will do whatever it takes to keep him alive. Jack felt something shift in his chest, some frozen place that had been ice since Sarah died and shattered completely when Daniel followed her. He had not asked for this bond, had not wanted the complications it brought. But standing here in this alien place connected to a being whose loneliness matched his own, he found himself making a decision that surprised even him. Then I guess we better start studying. The trials begin tomorrow, and I have never been very good at losing. The nights stretched before them, filled with lessons and preparations, and the quiet building of something none of them had names for yet. Outside the window, the stars burned cold and distant, indifferent to the small dramas playing out beneath their light. But Jack Reeves had never needed the universe to care about his survival. He had only ever needed a mission worth completing and people worth protecting. Now he had both. Tomorrow the trials would begin. Tomorrow he would prove that humanity was more than the primitive species Kalen believed them to be. Tomorrow he would fight for his life, for Sarah's throne, for Maya's safe return to Earth. And somewhere in the depths of the station, Lord Kalen was almost certainly making plans of his own. The game was just beginning. The first trial began at artificial dawn amber light, creeping through crystalline walls to illuminate an examination chamber that stretched 30 feet in every direction. Holographic symbols covered every surface, characters that bore no resemblance to any language humanity had ever encountered. 24 hours. That was all the time Jack had been given to decode what Valerian scholars spent decades studying. General Theron stood among the observers, his lined features revealing nothing of his thoughts. Lord Kalen occupied an elevated platform, forearms folded in a posture of barely concealed anticipation. Sarah watched from her throne, and through their bond, Jack felt her terror hiding beneath layers of royal composure. She believed he would fail. She believed they would both die. She was fighting that belief with everything she had, but faith was a difficult thing to manufacture on command. The symbols are representations of our oldest recorded language. The trial overseer, an elderly Valerian, whose glowing patterns had faded to pale silver, spoke with the detached tone of someone explaining rules to a condemned prisoner. You must identify the meaning of the central passage before the time expires. No assistance is permitted. No reference materials. Only your primitive mind against the accumulated wisdom of 10,000 years. Jack studied the display without responding. The symbols curved and spiraled in patterns that seemed random at first glance, but his trained eye was already detecting repetitions, clusters, frequencies that suggested underlying structure. He had seen something like this before, though the memory came from stories rather than personal experience. His father had spent 3 months in a signals intelligence unit during Vietnam, staring at intercepted messages that American cryptographers dismissed as unsolvable. The Viet Cong used codes built on linguistic foundations so different from Western languages that conventional decryption methods failed completely. The old man had told Jack about the breakthrough that came at 4 in the morning, when exhaustion stripped away all assumptions about how communication was supposed to work. The codes were not hiding meaning within symbols, his father had explained during one of their long conversations on the back porch in Houston. They were using the relationships between symbols, the spaces and connections and sequences, to carry information that the symbols themselves never contained. Like trying to read music by looking at individual notes rather than the melody they created together. Jack had applied that lesson throughout his military career, finding patterns in enemy communications that others missed because they were looking at the wrong thing. Now, standing in an alien examination chamber with his life hanging in the balance, he let that same approach guide his analysis. He stopped trying to decode the symbols and started looking at what existed between them. Maya watched from the observation gallery, her hands gripping the railing with white-knuckled intensity. She had spent the previous night helping Jack prepare, though neither of them had possessed any real idea what preparation might accomplish. He had taught her the basics of pattern analysis, the techniques his father had developed in Vietnam, and that Jack had refined over decades of military intelligence work. She had absorbed the lessons with the same fierce concentration her father had always displayed. Find the repetition, Jack had told her. Every language, every code, every system of communication has patterns that repeat. Find them, and you find the key. But Valerian symbols did not repeat in any way that human perception could immediately detect. The display showed thousands of unique characters, each one appearing exactly once in the massive holographic text. Traditional cryptographic analysis seemed useless, unless the repetition existed somewhere else entirely. Jack walked closer to the display, ignoring the murmurs from the assembled observers. He was not looking at the symbols anymore. He was looking at the spaces between them, the distances and angles and relationships that connected each character to its neighbors. And slowly and possibly he began to see it. The spacing was not random. The distances between symbols followed a mathematical progression, a sequence that repeated in cycles of 17. The angles at which symbols were oriented created secondary patterns, triangular relationships that overlaid the primary text like a shadow alphabet hiding in plain sight. This is not a language. Jack spoke aloud, his voice carrying through the silent chamber. It is a battle plan. The observers stirred. Lord Kalen leaned forward, his expression shifting from contempt to something more dangerous. General Theron's eyes narrowed with sudden interest. The symbols are camouflage. Jack continued tracing relationships with his finger, connecting invisible lines across the holographic display. The real information is encoded in the spatial relationships. Distance indicates troop strength. Angle indicates direction of attack. Clustering indicates timing of coordinated maneuvers. Impossible. Lord Kalen's voice cracked across the chamber. The sacred texts have been studied for millennia. They are religious documents, not military communications. With respect, Lord Kalen, your scholars have been looking at the wrong thing for millennia. Jack did not turn to face him. If I am reading this correctly, this text describes a coordinated assault on multiple defensive positions. 17 primary targets with supporting attacks on secondary objectives. Time to draw reinforcements away from the main thrust. General Theron descended from the observation platform, moving toward the display, with the focused intensity of a predator scenting blood. He studied the patterns Jack had identified, four arms moving in complex gestures that manipulated the holographic projection. Minutes passed in absolute silence. The human is correct. Theron's voice carried a weight that silenced every whisper in the chamber. I have studied military history for 3 centuries. This matches the tactical signature of the Void Campaign's wars fought before our recorded history began. Wars we believed were myth. The implications rippled through the assembly like shockwaves. Religious texts that were actually military codes. Sacred traditions built on misunderstood battlefield communications. Everything Valerian culture believed about its ancient past called into question by a human who had been on their station for less than 2 days. Lord Kalen's expression had gone completely blank, the careful mask of a politician concealing furious calculation. The trial is concluded. His voice emerged flat and controlled. The human has passed the first test. Jack finally turned to face him, and something passed between them that required no translation. Kalen had expected him to fail. Kalen had been counting on his failure. And now Kalen was recalculating, adjusting whatever plans he had set in motion to account for this unexpected variable. The celebration lasted only until nightfall. Maya joined Jack in his quarters, her excitement barely contained despite the gravity of their situation. You just rewrote their entire understanding of ancient history. Do you realize what that means? It means I made an enemy of everyone who built their career on the old interpretation. Jack settled into a chair that adjusted to his human proportions with unsettling precision. It means Kalen is going to try something else. He did not expect me to pass, which means whatever comes next will be something he controls more directly. The second trial, Jack nodded. Strength, combat. Probably against some undefeated champion who has been killing challengers since before my grandparents were born. Then we need to prepare, figure out their fighting techniques, find weaknesses. That is exactly what they will expect. Jack's eyes had taken on the distant focus that Maya recognized from mission briefings, the look of a commander seeing patterns invisible to everyone else. They will be watching everything I do between now and the trial. If I train in combat, they will know my capabilities. If I study their fighters, they will know my strategy. So what do you do instead? I watch. I listen. I let them underestimate me just like they have been underestimating me since I arrived. And when the moment comes, I use everything they do not know against them. The door opened without warning, admitting Sarah in simple robes that made her look less like a queen and more like the medical officer Jack had first encountered. Her glowing patterns pulsed with emotions that flowed through their bond relief anxiety, something warmer that neither of them had acknowledged aloud. I needed to see that you were unharmed. Her eyes flickered to Maya with something that might have been curiosity before diplomatic training reasserted itself. The council is in chaos after your performance today. Scholars who have devoted their lives to studying the sacred texts are demanding investigations. Several have accused you of blasphemy. Blasphemy because I was right. Blasphemy because you are human. Sarah moved closer and Jack felt the bond between them strengthen with proximity. They cannot accept that a primitive species could understand something they failed to grasp for 10,000 years. Lord Kalen is already using their anger to build opposition against you. Jack absorbed this information without visible reaction. What about the second trial you will face, Valdris? Sarah's voice carried a weight that made Maya's breath catch. He has been champion of Valerian for 200 years. He has killed over 300 challengers in formal combat. He is stronger than you, faster than you, and more experienced than any warrior alive. Then I will have to be smarter than him. You do not understand. Sarah's 4 hands reached for his in intimate gesture that seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. Valdris does not simply defeat his opponents. He destroys them. He makes examples of them. He will try to break you in ways that have nothing to do with winning the trial. Through their bond, Jack felt the memory she was sharing a previous challenger, a noble from a distant world being systematically dismantled in the combat arena. Not killed quickly, but taken apart piece by piece, while the crowd watched in horrified fascination. Valdris had smiled throughout, enjoying the destruction the way other beings enjoyed music or art. I have faced men like him before. Jack's voice remained steady despite the horror of what she had shown him. They all have the same weakness. What weakness? They need their victims to be afraid. Fear is the fuel that powers their cruelty. Take away the fear and they do not know what to do. Sarah studied his face, searching for the doubt that should have been there. She found none. Through their bond, she felt only the calm certainty of a man who had already made peace with his own mortality, who feared nothing because he had already lost everything that fear could threaten. You are unlike any being I have ever encountered, Jack Reeves. I have been told that before, usually right before someone tried to kill me. The night deepened around them, and Sarah shared what she knew of Valdris, his fighting style, his preferences, his psychological patterns. Jack absorbed it all without comment, filing information away for later analysis. When she finally left, the bond between them stretched like a golden thread across the distance. Maya watched her go with an expression that mixed curiosity and concern. She is different when she is with you. Less like a queen and more like a person. She has been alone for 200 years. Jack's voice carried something that might have been sadness or might have been recognition. Surrounded by people who see only her crown, never her. I know what that kind of loneliness does to a person. Because of losing Sarah and Daniel, because of everyone I have ever lost. Jack turned to face the window, watching stars that were not his own burn in an unfamiliar sky. When you bury enough people, you start to forget that connection is even possible. You build walls so high that no one can climb them, and then you wonder why you feel so alone. But she found a way through your walls. No. The word emerged softer than he intended. The bond tore them down whether I wanted it to or not, and now I have to decide what to build in their place. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams that mixed memory and premonition. Jack walked through Afghan mountains that became crystalline corridors, faced enemies whose features shifted between human and Valerian, heard Sarah's voice telling him to keep living, even when living hurt more than dying. When he woke, the artificial dawn was already creeping through his windows, and something was wrong. The pain hit like a hammer to his chest, sudden and absolute. His vision blurred. His lungs refused to fill with air. Through the haze of agony, he recognized the symptoms: poison, fast-acting, and designed to mimic natural cardiac failure. Someone had gotten to him during the night, past every security measure, past every guard. Across the station, Sarah screamed. The bond transmitted his pain directly into her nervous system, feedback that threatened to overwhelm them both. But it also transmitted something else: awareness, location, direction. Through their connection, Jack felt her reaching for him, felt power flowing from her into his failing body. Hold on, her voice echoed in his mind, carried by the bond rather than sound. I am coming. Hold on. Jack focused on breathing. One breath, then another. The poison burned through his veins like liquid fire, but Sarah's energy was there too, fighting it, slowing its progression. He thought of Daniel, of Sarah, of everyone he had lost. He thought of Maya sleeping in the next room, counting on him to keep his promise to her father. He was not ready to die. Not yet. Not like this. Guards burst through his door, minutes later, alerted by sensors that had finally detected the anomaly in his vital signs. Maya was with them, her face pale with terror, her hands reaching for him with desperate need. But it was Sarah who saved him, arriving in a blaze of light that scattered everyone in her path. She placed all 4 hands against his chest, and the bond between them flared with intensity that made the original healing look like a candle compared to a bonfire. Jack felt the poison being drawn out of his body, felt it flowing through their connection into hers. She was taking it into herself, diluting it with her alien biology, destroying it with immune responses that his human system could never have mounted. The process took 17 minutes. When it ended, Sarah collapsed beside him, her glowing patterns dimmed to barely visible flickering. Jack gathered her into his arms without thinking, holding her as unconsciousness claimed them both. He woke to find Maya standing guard over them, a weapon she had clearly taken from one of the guards held in hands that knew how to use it. General Theron stood nearby, his lined features showing emotions that Jack had not seen there before. Concern, anger, and something that might have been respect. The poison was Zephyrian nightshade. Theron's voice carried the controlled fury of a military commander confronting betrayal, modified to target human biology specifically. Someone on this station wanted you dead and did not care if the Queen died with you. Who had access to my quarters? Theron's expression hardened. That is what I intend to find out. The investigation revealed the truth within hours. A servant who had attended Sarah since childhood, one of the few beings allowed unrestricted access to royal spaces, had administered the poison through the ventilation system. When confronted, she broke down immediately, sobbing confessions that implicated Lord Kalen in everything from the assassination attempt to a conspiracy spanning decades. Sarah wanted to execute her immediately. Jack saw it in her eyes, felt it through their bond. Rage that burned with the intensity of a star-going nova. This woman had served her since childhood. This woman had braided her hair, had comforted her after nightmares had been the closest thing to family that a lonely queen possessed. And she had betrayed everything for money, for threats, for promises that Lord Kalen had made and would never keep. Wait, Jack's voice cut through the red haze of Sarah's fury. She is not the enemy. She is a weapon that someone else wielded. She tried to kill you. Sarah's voice shook with barely contained violence. She tried to kill us both. And killing her will tell us nothing. We need to know what Kalen is planning. We need to know who else is involved. We need her alive and talking, not dead and silent. Through their peon bond, Jack transmitted calm, the cold tactical clarity that had kept him alive through situations that should have killed him a dozen times over. Sarah's rage did not diminish, but it found a channel, a direction that served purpose rather than mere destruction. The servant was taken into custody, placed under guard by soldiers loyal only to General Theron. Her confession came in fragments over the following hours. Kalen had been planning this for over a century, building a network of agents throughout the royal household, waiting for the right moment to seize power. Sarah's bond with Arig had forced him to accelerate his timeline, but his ultimate goal remained unchanged. He wants the throne. Sarah spoke the words as though they tasted of ash. He has always wanted it, ever since my parents died. Your parents. Jack felt the connection form in his mind, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Kalen is your uncle. He was next in line for succession before you were born. The weight of implications settled over the room. Maya voiced what everyone was thinking. The assassination of your parents, was that him too? Shra did not answer, but she did not need to. The truth was written in her suddenly rigid posture, in the patterns along her neck that blazed with colors Jack had never seen before, in the grief that flooded through their bond. You did not know. His voice emerged gentle, despite the horror of the revelation. All these years you did not know for certain. I suspected. Always suspected. But suspecting and knowing are different things. Sura's voice cracked. He killed them. He killed them, and then he raised me, trained me, shaped me into the ruler he thought he could control. And when he realized I would never be his puppet, he started planning to kill you too. The second trial was postponed while the investigation continued, but Jack knew that delay would not last. Kalen had too much political power to be arrested on the word of a single servant. The council would demand proof, and proof would be difficult to obtain from a man who had spent over a century covering his tracks, which meant the trials would continue, which meant Jack still had to face Valdris. The arena was a masterpiece of architectural intimidation. Tiered seating rose in concentric circles around a combat floor made of material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Thousands of Valerians had gathered to watch the human challenger face their undefeated champion, and their mood was hostile. Valdris entered first, a mountain of muscle and violence that made every other Valerian Jack had seen look delicate by comparison. His forearms were thick with combat modifications, cybernetic enhancements that blurred the line between flesh and weapon. His eyes held nothing but anticipation, the eager hunger of a predator that had not faced worthy prey in far too long. Jack entered second wearing borrowed combat attire that hung loose on his human frame. He carried no weapons, having declined all offers of armament. The crowd laughed at this, interpreting it as ignorance rather than strategy. The human faces the champion unarmed. Lord Kalen's amplified voice carried across the arena. Let the record show that he was offered weapons appropriate to the trial and refused them. Valdres smiled, revealing teeth that had been filed to points. I will make this last human. You have earned a slow death for the chaos you have caused. Jack said nothing. He simply stood in the center of the combat floor watching his opponent with the patient attention of a man who had learned long ago that the loudest threats came from the most insecure sources. The trial began with a chime that echoed like a funeral bell. Valdres charged immediately, all four arms swinging in coordinated patterns designed to overwhelm defense through sheer volume of attack. Any normal response would have been to retreat, to dodge, to create distance. Jack stepped forward. The move was so unexpected that Valdres's first strike went wide momentum, carrying him past the point where his human opponent should have been. Jack was already inside his guard, already exploiting the split-second vulnerability that aggression always created. One precise blow to a nerve cluster that Sarah had identified during their preparation. Not enough to cause real damage, but enough to make Valdres's lower right arm spasm uselessly. The crowd went silent. The fight continued for nearly an hour. Jack made no attempt to win through direct confrontation. Instead, he used movement positioning, the patient accumulation of small advantages. Every time Valdres committed to an attack, Jack found a way to make him pay for it. Every time the champion thought he had cornered his prey, the prey was somewhere else entirely. Valdres grew frustrated, then angry, then desperate. His attacks became wilder, more powerful, but also more predictable. Jack weathered them all, accepting hits that would have killed lesser men, using the pain as fuel for focus rather than collapse. Finally, after 63 minutes of combat, Jack found his opening. Valdres committed to a killing blow. Jack moved not away, but towards, slipping inside the arc of those massive arms, and suddenly his hand was at the champion's throat, a piece of sharpened debris pressed against the pulsing artery beneath silver-blue skin. The arena held its breath. Jack could have killed him. Everyone watching knew it. The trial rules permitted lethal force. 300 previous challengers had died on this floor. Instead, Jack stepped back. I did not come here to kill, his voice carried clearly. I came here to prove that I am worthy. Death proves nothing except the ability to destroy. Any fool can destroy. He turned to face the silent crowd, to face Lord Kalen, to face Sarah, whose pride and love flooded through their bond. I am Colonel Jack Reeves, United States Air Force. I have fought in wars that your people have never imagined. I have buried my wife and my son and more friends than I can count. I have faced death so many times that it has become familiar, and I will not become a murderer to satisfy your traditions. Valdres lay on the combat floor, defeated but alive. When he finally rose, he did something no one expected. He knelt before Jack, head bowed. You have defeated me fairly. I yield to your worthiness. General Theron rose from his seat, descended to the arena floor, and knelt as well. This human has shown more honor in defeat and victory than most warriors show in a lifetime. I acknowledge him as worthy. One by one, other military officers followed, then nobles, then common citizens who had come to watch a human die and instead witness something that would reshape their understanding of what aliens could be. Lord Kalen watched it all with eyes that promised retribution, but even he could not argue with the unanimous verdict. The second trial was complete. Later in her private chambers, Sarah shared a secret that changed everything. The light bond is not random. General Theron told me this after your victory. Through their connection, Jack felt her nervousness. In 10,000 years of recorded history, the bond has only formed between beings whose souls are already connected. Twin flames, the ancient texts call them. Two halves of one existence, separated by circumstance, but destined to find each other. You are saying we were meant to meet. I am saying the universe itself conspired to bring us together. Sarah's four hands found his. You did not contaminate me, Jack. You completed me. And she faltered. I have been waiting for you, all my life, without knowing what I was waiting for. Jack felt her vulnerability, her fear, the desperate need beneath layers of authority. He felt his own walls trembling under the weight of connection that demanded acknowledgement. I am 58 years old. His voice emerged rough with emotion. I have more past than future. I am broken in ways that may never heal. So am I. Sarah's eyes met his. We are both broken, but perhaps we can be broken together. The third trial approached, carrying implications neither fully understood. Lord Kalen had grown quiet, his machinations retreating behind closed doors. Maya had found unexpected allies among young Valerian pilots, warriors who had watched Jack's fight and recognized something familiar in his approach to impossible odds. Among those pilots was a female named Kira, whose talent reminded Jack of Maya herself, fierce and determined to prove herself in a military hierarchy that had underestimated her potential. She absorbed his tactical lessons with the intensity of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of instruction. "You fight like you have nothing to lose," Jack observed, after watching her execute a particularly aggressive simulation run. "I have everything to lose." Her voice carried personal stakes. "My family lives in the capital city. If raiders ever break through, everyone I love dies. Then you understand why we cannot fail." The final test was loyalty. Jack would have to choose between freedom and connection, between the home he had lost and the home he might yet find. The choice seemed obvious to everyone who knew him, but nothing about Jack Reeves had ever been obvious, and the universe was not finished, surprising them yet. The third trial arrived with the weight of inevitability. Jack stood before the council chamber, flanked by guards whose attitudes had shifted from contempt to uncertainty, watching as massive doors parted to reveal the assembly that would decide his fate. Lord Kalen occupied his elevated position with satisfied stillness. General Theron stood among the military commanders, and Sarah watched from her throne, their bond transmitting fear and hope and love. The final trial tests loyalty. Lord Kalen's voice echoed through the crystalline chamber. "The human must choose between his world and ours, between freedom and bondage, between the life he knew and the existence we offer." A portal shimmered into existence at the center of the chamber, its surface rippling with images of Earth that struck Jack like physical blows. Texas plains stretching toward horizons he had known since childhood. The Austin skyline where he had built a life. The cemetery where Sarah and Daniel lay beneath stones he had not visited in 3 years because the pain was still too raw. Step through this portal and you return to your world. Kalen's forearms spread wide. The bond will fade over the following year, causing death to both parties, but you will die free. You will die human. Or remain here bound to a queen who chose you without your consent and face whatever future that choice demands. Jack studied the portal without moving toward it. Through his connection with Sarah, he felt her trying to suppress hope, trying to prepare herself for abandonment, trying to believe she could face death with dignity. 2 centuries of loneliness had taught her to expect nothing from others. Maya stood in the observation gallery, her father's eyes watching him. She had been his responsibility since the attack, his promise to a dead friend. If he stayed, she stayed. If he left, she came with him. The choice seemed obvious. Everyone expected him to walk toward that portal, toward home. Lord Kalen had designed this trial to exploit human attachment to origin. But Kalen had made a fundamental miscalculation. He had assumed Jack still had a home to return to. Earth held nothing for him except graves and memories. The Air Force had retired him. His sister had her own life. The house in Houston, where he had raised Daniel, stood empty, sold to strangers. Jack had volunteered for this mission because he was already gone, already disconnected, already drifting without anchor or purpose. Then he had crashed into this impossible place and found something he had stopped believing was possible. Connection, purpose, a reason to keep breathing. Jack walked toward the portal and the assembly held its breath. Sarah's anguish flooded through their bond. Maya's confusion radiated from the gallery. He stopped directly before the shimmering surface, close enough to feel the pull of home, close enough to see his reflection distorted by the energy field. For a long moment, he simply stood there. Then he reached into the portal's control matrix and began to work. The technical skills he had developed during decades of signals intelligence translated surprisingly well to Valerian technology. Their systems operated on different principles, but followed the same fundamental logic. The portal's destination shifted. The image of Texas faded, replaced by the interior of the council chamber itself. Jack stepped through the modified gateway and emerged exactly where he had started, but facing the opposite direction. He was looking directly at Lord Kalen now, and his expression carried none of the deference protocol demanded. "I am not leaving." His voice filled the chamber. "Not because I have nowhere else to go, though that is also true. I am staying because, for the first time in 5 years, I have found people worth fighting for. The woman who saved my life when she had no obligation. The young pilot who reminds me of everything good about humanity. The soldiers who showed me respect when their traditions demanded contempt. He turned to face the full assembly. I am Colonel Jack Reeves, United States Air Force. I have served my country for 37 years. I have buried my wife, my son, and more friends than I can count. I have faced death so many times that it has become familiar. And I am telling you now that I choose to stay. I choose Serafina. I choose this fight. His eyes found Sarah's across the crowded chamber, and through their bond, he felt her shock transforming into something brighter. I made a promise to bring Maya home safely, and I will keep that promise. But home is not a place. Home is the people who make you feel like you belong. And for the first time since my son died, I have found people who make me feel like my existence matters. Silence held the chamber. Then General Theron rose. The human has passed all three trials. His voice carried the weight of 3 centuries of military service. By ancient law and modern witness, he is worthy. He belongs to our queen, and our queen belongs to him. The declaration triggered reactions that rippled through the assembly. Some nobles protested, others remained silent, and a growing number began to acknowledge what they had witnessed with gestures of respect. Lord Kalen rose from his throne, his expression a mask. The trials are concluded. The human has proven himself according to law. I concede his worthiness. The words should have signaled victory. But Jack had spent too many years reading enemies to miss what lurked beneath Kalen's surrender. This was tactical retreat. Whatever plans the Lord Regent had set in motion, they had not ended. The confirmation came within hours. General Theron arrived with news that transformed celebration into crisis. Long-range sensors had detected movement at the edge of Valerian space. Thousands of ships in attack formations bearing energy signatures of Zephyrian raiders. Not random pirates, but a coordinated invasion force, the largest military threat Valerian had faced in 3 centuries. They will arrive in 48 hours. Theron's face showed grim acceptance. Our defensive fleet numbers 800 vessels. They bring over 3,000. Jack studied the tactical display, his mind automatically cataloging variables. The Zephyrian fleet approached through a corridor cluttered with asteroid fields and debris clouds, natural obstacles that would force them to maintain formation. My father told me about Khe Sanh when the North Vietnamese surrounded them with forces that outnumbered their garrison 10-1. His voice carried the weight of inherited wisdom. They survived because they did not try to match strength. They used terrain against the enemy, made them fight on ground that favored defenders. Theron's eyes narrowed. You propose a similar strategy. Your asteroid fields create natural choke points. Jack traced paths through the holographic display. Force them to concentrate their fleet, then hit them from multiple angles with smaller, faster strike groups. The planning session lasted through the night. Maya joined them, her tactical instincts proving valuable. Sarah participated as Supreme Commander, her understanding of fleet capabilities essential to translating Jack's strategies into practical operations. By dawn, they had developed a plan that General Theron admitted possessed actual chance of success. But execution required pilots who understood unconventional tactics. Valerian military doctrine emphasized direct confrontation. What Jack suggested demanded flexibility and improvisation. Your young pilots. Jack addressed Theron directly. They have skill and courage, but they have been taught to fight only one way. I need to teach them others. The training began immediately, compressing weeks of instruction into desperate hours. Jack worked with squadrons who had never encountered human tactical doctrine, explaining concepts that seemed revolutionary to beings raised on different military traditions. Rule 1, never attack where your enemy is strong. Find the weakness, exploit it, move on before they can respond. Rule 2, confusion is a weapon. If your enemy does not know where you will strike, they cannot prepare adequate defense. Rule 3, preservation matters more than glory. A pilot who survives to fight tomorrow is worth more than one who dies today. Maya translated his instructions into demonstrations flying simulated combat scenarios. The young Valerian pilots watched with growing respect. Among them, Kira absorbed his lessons with fierce intensity. Her family lived in the capital city. Everything she loved depended on what happened in the next 48 hours. You will lead the second strike group, Jack told her after watching her master a particularly difficult maneuver. Maya leads the first. You lead the second. Show them what you have learned. Kira's glowing patterns brightened with pride and determination. I will not fail you, Commander. The final hours before battle arrived. Jack found Sarah on an observation deck overlooking the vastness of space, her forearms wrapped around herself in a gesture of vulnerability. In 2 centuries of rule, I have never faced anything like this. Her voice emerged barely above a whisper. My parents died when I was a child. My uncle has spent his existence trying to destroy me. And now the largest invasion fleet in 300 years approaches, while half my council plots betrayal. Jack stood beside her close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. When I was 23 years old, my convoy got ambushed outside Kandahar. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and miles from any support. Every morning I woke up expecting that day to be my last. Every night I went to sleep amazed that I had survived another 24 hours. How did you endure it? I stopped thinking about tomorrow. Tomorrow was too big, too full of possibilities I could not control. I focused on the next hour, the next minute, the next breath. Survival is not about courage. Survival is about refusing to quit until the mission is complete. Sarah turned to face him, her shimmering eyes reflecting starlight. And if we do not survive this, then we die together. Jack's voice carried no hesitation. I have already buried everyone I ever loved. If this is the end, at least I will not face it alone. She reached for him, forearms pulling him close. Through their bond, he felt her gratitude, her love, her fierce determination. He held her with human arms that seemed inadequate to the task but sufficient to the moment. The battle began at dawn of the second day when the first Zephyrian ships emerged from the asteroid field. General Theron commanded the main defensive fleet from his flagship. Jack operated from a secondary command center, directing the strike squadrons he had trained. Maya led the first attack group, 12 pilots who had absorbed Jack's lessons with desperate intensity. They struck the enemy flank as the main fleet engaged Theron's defensive line, hitting fuel transports and command vessels before retreating into the debris field. The Zephyrians had expected traditional tactics. What they encountered was chaos, seemingly random strikes from multiple directions that disrupted coordination and prevented concentration of force. Strike Group 2 hit their communication relay and scatter. Jack's voice carried across tactical channels. Do not engage their battleships directly. Find the support vessels and make them bleed. Kira led her squadron through the debris field with precision, her family's faces burning in her mind as motivation. She struck 3 enemy supply ships before pulling back exactly as Jack had taught her. Hour after hour, the battle raged. Valerian losses mounted but remained within parameters. Zephyrian losses exceeded all projections. By the 8th hour, the invasion fleet had lost 60% of combat capability. By the 12th hour, Warlord Draven himself led a desperate push toward the station. Draven had once worn Valerian colors, had served as general under Sarah's father, before ambition twisted him into something unrecognizable. His betrayal had opened the door for the pirates who now served him, and his hatred for the royal family burned with the intensity of a man who believed he had been denied what was rightfully his. Now he sought to claim through violence what politics had failed to deliver. He broke through. The tactical update came with grim recognition. A Zephyrian assault force had penetrated the defensive perimeter, landing troops on the station itself. And leading that force was not only Draven, but Lord Kalen, whose treachery had finally emerged into undeniable daylight. The fighting in the station corridors was brutal in close quarters. Jack moved through familiar passages with Maya at his side, both armed with weapons taken from fallen guards. They found Sarah in the throne room, surrounded by loyal guards who had given their lives to protect her. Draven stood before her, massive and scarred from battles spanning centuries. Kalen stood beside him, forearms folded in anticipated victory. The human and his pet pilot. Draven's voice rumbled like distant thunder. I had hoped you would die in space, my dear niece. Kalen's voice dripped with false sympathy. Did you really believe you could stop what was coming? I have been planning this moment for over a century. Since the night I arranged your parents' deaths. Sarah's reaction was volcanic. Energy blazed along her glowing patterns, power gathering in her outstretched hands. Jack felt her rage through their bond fury that threatened to consume everything in its path, including herself. You murdered them. Her voice shook with barely contained violence. You murdered my parents and pretended to comfort me while I cried. You raised me like a daughter while plotting to destroy everything they built. I raised you like a tool. Kalen's mask finally dropped. You were always meant to be temporary, a placeholder until I could arrange proper succession, but you proved more stubborn than anticipated. Sarah's power built toward critical mass. Jack recognized the danger. If she released that energy in enclosed space, she might destroy Kalen, but she would destroy herself and everyone else as well. He reached for her through their bond, not with words but with emotion. Calm flowing from his experience into her chaos. Focus replacing rage. Do not become the monster he wants you to be. Your parents would not want you to destroy yourself for revenge. They would want you to survive, to build, to prove that everything he did was meaningless. The energy in Sarah's hands flickered, wavered, began to fade. Kalen's expression shifted from triumph to uncertainty. Draven had less patience for psychological manipulation. He lunged toward Jack with speed that belied his massive frame, 4 arms wielding weapons that had killed hundreds across decades of warfare. Jack was outmatched in every physical metric. But physical metrics had never been the whole story. He fought the way he had taught Maya and Kira to fight: indirect, adaptive, refusing to engage on terms that favored his opponent. Every time Draven committed to an attack, Jack made him pay. The opportunity came when Draven overextended. Jack slipped inside his guard, accepting a wound to his shoulder, and drove a blade into the warlord's throat. Draven fell. Kalen watched his enforcer die with an expression that suggested he was already calculating salvage options. His 4 hands moved toward concealed controls. If I cannot have this empire, no one will. His voice had lost its diplomatic polish. I carry enough explosive force in my body modifications to destroy this entire station. 10 million dead because you could not simply accept what was inevitable. The threat froze everyone. Guards stopped recognizing that any attack might trigger detonation. Sarah's power flickered, but found no target she could strike without risking exactly the outcome Kalen threatened. Jack felt the weight of the moment settling onto shoulders that had already carried too much. He thought of Maya somewhere in the station fighting for her life. He thought of Kira and her family. He thought of the young pilots whose families would die if Kalen succeeded. He thought of Sarah bound to him through forces neither fully understood, facing the loss of everything. He thought of Daniel, whose last words had been an apology for not being able to come home. There might be a way. Sarah's voice reached him through their bond. The light bond can absorb energy, redirect it. If we link fully, completely, we might be able to contain the explosion. It could kill us both. Yes, her 4 hands reached for his human ones, but it might save everyone else. Jack looked into her eyes and saw everything he had lost, reflected in everything he might yet save. A queen who had never known love, a soldier who had forgotten how to live, 2 broken beings who had found each other across impossible distances. His hands closed around hers. Then let us find out what we are capable of together. The bond between them had always been strong. Now they opened that connection, fully holding nothing back, becoming for one transcendent moment, not 2 beings, but one consciousness. Kalen triggered his explosives. Energy beyond description flooded into their joined forms, power sufficient to level mountains. Jack felt it burning through every cell, rewriting him on a fundamental level. He felt Sarah's agony matching his own, felt their bond straining under pressure it was never designed to withstand. And then something unexpected happened. The energy did not destroy them. Instead, it transformed them. The light bond pushed beyond all known limits, evolved into something the ancient texts called the perfect union. 2 beings synchronized so completely that death could not claim either, while the other survived. The explosion that should have killed 10 million people was absorbed into that union, converted into something new. Light blazed from their joined forms, brilliant enough to blind anyone watching, powerful enough to reshape reality itself. When vision returned, Jack and Sarah stood in the center of an undamaged throne room. Kalen lay unconscious at their feet, his explosive modifications deactivated by the same transformation that had saved the station. And the bond between them had changed, deepened, become something that neither had words to describe. General Theron was the first to find them, leading soldiers who had fought through the station to reach the throne room. He stopped at the sight of them, his weathered features showing emotions he had probably not experienced in centuries. The legends were true. His voice carried awe. The perfect union. I never believed I would witness it. What does it mean? Jack's voice emerged strange, even to his own ears, carrying a harmonics that had not been there before. It means you are bound eternally. Theron knelt, and his soldiers followed. It means that as long as you remain together, neither of you will age, will sicken, will die. The universe itself has recognized your connection. Sarah turned to Jack, her eyes reflecting light in patterns that seemed almost like tears. We have been given forever. Then we better make it count. 1 year later, the Interplanetary Academy opened its doors to its first class. Jack stood before them in the uniform of Fleet Commander, the rank Sarah had created specifically for his position, addressing young beings from dozens of species. The most important thing I can teach you is not tactics or strategy or combat technique. His voice carried across the assembly hall. The most important thing is understanding why we fight at all. Maya stood among the Academy instructors wearing the insignia of Wing Commander. Beside her stood Kira, now leader of the elite reconnaissance squadron, her family watching proudly from the gallery. We do not fight for glory or power. We fight to protect those who cannot protect themselves. We fight to build something worth preserving. We fight because the alternative is surrendering everything that makes existence worthwhile. Sarah watched from the observation gallery, 4 hands resting on her barely visible pregnancy. The physicians had declared the child impossible, the first hybrid of human and Valerian genetics in recorded history. But Jack had learned to stop being surprised by impossibilities. I lost my son to war, my wife to cancer, my belief that the universe contains any justice or meaning. And then I crashed into this station and found everything I thought I had lost forever. He looked up at Sarah, at the future they were building together, at the impossible life growing within her. Home is not a place you are born. Home is the people who make you feel like you belong. And today, looking at all of you, I feel like I am finally home. Later that evening, Jack and Sarah stood on the observation deck where they had once faced the prospect of annihilation together. The stars burned eternal beyond the transparent walls, indifferent to the small dramas playing out beneath their light, but beautiful nonetheless. When we first met, you thought I was just a medical officer. Jack's voice carried amusement. I thought you were the most confusing alien I had ever encountered. I was terrified of you. Sarah leaned against him. You faced death with jokes. You questioned everything. You refused to behave the way prisoners were supposed to behave. I have never been very good at doing what I am supposed to do, and I have spent 2 centuries doing nothing but what I was supposed to do. She tilted her face toward his. Perhaps that is why we work. You teach me to break rules. I teach you which rules are worth keeping. What about our child? What rules will we teach them, the rules that matter? That courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else is more important. That love is not weakness, but the greatest strength any being can possess. That home is not where you are from, but who you choose to become. The communication terminal chimed with an incoming message. Jack moved to check it and found a transmission from Earth. NASA was requesting his presence for the formal ceremony establishing diplomatic relations between humanity and the Valerian Empire. They wanted him to introduce Sarah to the world he had left behind, to bridge the gap between species who had never imagined they would encounter each other. It seems I will finally get to show you where I come from. Jack turned to Sarah. Texas, the Gulf Coast, the cemetery where my family is buried. Are you ready for that? I do not know. But I think that is the point. He reached for her hand, 4 alien fingers intertwining with 5 human ones. Growth requires facing the things we are not ready for. Then we faced them together. They stood in silence for a long moment, watching stars that had witnessed the birth and death of countless civilizations. Somewhere among those distant lights, Earth waited to meet the woman who had saved its most decorated astronaut. Somewhere among those distant lights, new adventures waited for a soldier who had finally found peace. Jack Reeves had traveled much farther than any human in history. He had faced death more times than he could count. He had lost everything that once defined his existence and built something new from the ruins. But the journey was not over. The journey never really ended. It simply changed shape, revealing new horizons when old ones were reached. And he would face every horizon with Sarah beside him, their bond a light that no darkness could extinguish. The future stretched before them like an unwritten story full of challenges they could not predict and joys they could not imagine. They would face it together, a human soldier and an alien queen, two broken beings who had somehow become whole. This was not an ending, this was a beginning.